Welcome to the latest episode of the Agentic Advantage, where today we have a very special guest to share with you.
We're gonna invite Kevin Bernstein, who is one of our premier solution architect in our company, and he's gonna talk about real customer use cases and show some demonstration.
Masaki, I don't know about you, but I am super stoked to have Kevin on this week because I know we're going to talk about some specific examples that are going to bring to life Maestro and all that that means for customers in terms of orchestrating agents, robots, and people in a way that's governed and secure. So I don't know about you, but I'm super stoked to have him on this week.
Yeah, Kevin is my colleague in the same team. He's one of the most talented solution architect in this company, and he worked on tons of agentic automation use cases. So I'm so excited to hear what he's going to introduce to us.
Yeah.
Kevin, tell us about yourself.
Yeah. Thanks, Bill. Hi, everybody. I'm Kevin Bernstein. As Misaki mentioned, I'm a solution architect on the incubation team here at UiPath. And yeah, here today to talk about all things Maestro related. We've been, over about a year now with Maestro out in the field, seeing customers get adopted with that product, seeing how people are using it on a day-to-day basis. And yeah, I have a ton of stories from the field. So happy to be here.
Kevin, I'm interested, and I know Masaki is too, on what are you seeing? You know, we're in the latter half of January, the first month of the new year. Maestro's been live now. Customers are leveraging it. But if we kind of take a step back or maybe go to the 30,000-foot view, like what are you seeing across the landscape as it relates to agentic automation with the customers that you're working with day in and day out?
Yeah. Bill, one of the things that at least I'm really noticing, all customers are still trying to get their feet wet within Maestro. We're seeing that customers are really seeing it as a very valuable tool in their kind of tool set to be able to work with agents and being able to bridge that the connection between humans, robots, and agents all together in one canvas. And where we look at like the way that agents are being used today, right? Everyone's talking about agentic automation. Everyone's talking about how they can go through and start to automate some of these cognitive processes. The problem really relies down into, can you trust that agent reliably to handle whatever scenario end to end? And that's really where I'm seeing customers are starting to kind of see the gears turn off in their head and the light bulbs turn on, where they're seeing Maestro as this way to bring determinism to indeterministic processes, right? Especially with a lot of our customers that are looking to kind of use us in kind of these longer, kind of bigger processes. We see that Maestro is going to be like the perfect tool that blends together that indeterministic processing, being able to kick off like RPAs or APIs, and then have kind of those outputs be provided then to agents that are able to go through, take it to the next step, and be able to do that task that maybe there was some sort of cognitive decision that needed to be made. And then from there, having the ability to route that off to a human where needed, be able to bring them in the loop, give them all the justifications that the agent made, and then have them be able to go through and, approve whatever action that needs to go through and take place to go either write that back to a system, to approve a communication out to a customer, tons of different use cases that we're seeing. Yeah.
Hey, Misaki, I know you and I've talked about this a lot, this idea that companies need a way to orchestrate agents, robots, and people, right? And I'm sure you're seeing the same thing with the customers you talk about. Are you seeing the same things that Kevin's seeing?
Yes, Bill. I've seen similar cases where customer needs to orchestrate the agent, RPA, and the human in the loop. Many customers get stuck in this idea of when they think about agent, it's like a chatbot. But when it comes to enterprise level agentic orchestration automation, you really have to determine what kind of steps should be done by RPA, agent, human. The like the it requires a lot of designing time, and the Maestro is a perfect fit because it uses the BPM, business process modeling notation, which is the industry standard to describe the whole end-to-end business process. So it's business analysts can know how to use it already, and it will become the executable entity. So customer really loves that aspect of the product.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the challenges, I actually have a couple customers that are kind of leaning a little bit too hard in some of the agent spaces. Where, one of the common problems or pitfalls I see a lot of customers taking is they think that one agent is going to be able to go through and kind of solve the entire process, right?
Yeah.
And what we see is kind of this kind of overload of different tasks that you're going off and providing to your agent, which a lot of times the agent's going to go through and get right, but it can't handle for every single scenario. The models just aren't that good enough yet. And so, where we really see Maestro kind of coming into play is that it allows you to go through and break down that problem into smaller and smaller components and then string that problem together, be it through kind of having one agent talk to another agent, or being able to go through and have that agent be able to kick off a deterministic tool or an indeterministic tool to go through and kind of look up different results. And one of the customers I'm working with right now is having just this problem where I ended up kind of coming into the mix where we ended up seeing that the team had gone through and tried to stuff this. It was a P process where there's a bunch of rules that we had to essentially go through and follow as far as approving with an accounts payable process. As part of that, like one of the things that they were doing with the agent is like having it look at the invoice number, look at the PO number, do the mashup to see like, hey, are these going through and matching? And, along with like 7 or 8 other different rules that were kind of in scope for that. And the challenge with that is that there was a lot of indeterminism kind of built into those rules, but then there was also a lot of determinism built. And we ended up finding that the agent had a really low success rate, like somewhere around 20 or 30% when we were going through and doing the initial evals. And, kind of the coaching and the architecture that we've been working through is to actually kind of repivot that more into a Maestro-based workflow where we could pull out the pockets of determinism, run those through the Maestro workflow, and then have the agents kind of do the things that they're good at, the bread and butter for those, which is really that indeterministic processing.
Yeah, that's so key. Masaki and I've talked about that a lot. The ability to segment a process and allow agents to do what they do best, robots to do what they do best, then have a human in the loop to validate, or when the robot or the agent gets stuck or needs help. That process is so critical. I'm wondering what your customers are thinking about with regards to an agnostic tool like a UiPath, which isn't tied to one of their systems of record, say Microsoft or SAP or ServiceNow. Is that a common theme you're hearing from customers, or not so
Oh,
much?
absolutely. I'll give you an example of one of the world's largest software companies that we work with today. Essentially, they have a process that was a very manual process today, where they had essentially on their call center, they had a representative that would go in and kind of look at the call volume, the number of calls that are status in the various different queues for the different types of calls that we worked. And the way that their backend systems worked was that they would have to go through and manually move employees from one bucket to the next. And that was somebody's kind of full-time job, is just kind of monitoring calls that are coming in and then staffing appropriate resources that are, on site that day they're not on PTO. They're, have the skill sets to be able to respond to that queue and so forth. Right. And so there's this kind of process that they went through with a bunch of Excel spreadsheets to go through and have all the staffing mapping and what the people are skilled at. There was another spreadsheet for who's on PTO that day. There's another spreadsheet for all the different calls and what their current statuses were, or sorry, the call queues and what their current statuses were. And this was a really, really difficult problem that, we thought we could come in and apply agents to. And, essentially what we ended up using was Maestro to go through and kind of do all the deterministic steps of preparing all of that data, going off to these different Excel sheets inside of Google Workspace or, Microsoft Excel, or going out to, in this case, Salesforce to go off and grab the current call stack and queue. And then from there, we were able to go through and throw all that information into an agent, have it go through and do that indeterminate processing, come up with a plan on how it should go through and reroute things, hand it off to a human to approve that queue, and then we're able to go through and have an RPA take it and go make the requisite changes inside of Salesforce. Now,
Those
yeah,
tasks were impossible to process before with RPA and the just normal programming, right?
Absolutely, yeah, because there's so many different variables that come into play. You know, if a person's off one day, if they don't have the right skill set, all of this stuff is kept inside of indeterministic language on Excel sheets, right? And so you need a way to be able to go in and kind of say, hey, what does that field actually mean? And you know, obviously, you can go or you can use agents to go through and build out a prompt to essentially look at those fields and kind of make the understanding of what it's supposed to do. And then you're able to go through and kind of rework those cues accordingly.
It's really exciting. And I think that demonstrates this, what you were talking about earlier, which is really this end-to-end process where customers are stitching together the right solution for the right task, right? So that it all comes together in a way that's driving real value for the organization. I think that's really the critical part. I mean, Masaki and I talked about the MIT report that came out what mid last year, which said that something like 95% of organizations weren't getting value from their AI investment. And I think when the example you just gave is such a good example of how you do get value from an AI investment when you're trying to reduce operating expenses, trying to improve compliance, reduce errors, all those things that are so important to our customers.
Not trying to talk up our game or anything, but I think we're definitely higher than 95%. And I really think it bodes well to like just the ability for us to break these problems down in like a really simple manner. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I kind of have theory around it. I think a lot of AI projects fails because people are in the mindset of we should use the AI. What can we do with this AI? But the right approach is really like what is the business problem we have, and the design the end-to-end operation first. And a lot you will realize a lot of tasks are actually deterministic. So you can use API automation and the RPA, and which is more reliable anyway. So you should rely on that. And for those tasks that you can absolutely can do with RPA and API, that's where AI can be leveraged. And that's why UiPath implementation success rate is way higher than the 5% that your report was saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, so true. One of the things you and I talked about before, Masaki, was sometimes these AI projects are like a hammer looking for a nail, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
That's a good way
See
to put it.
the business problem, and then what is the right way to solve that business problem? And AI is going to be part of it in most cases, but robots and other technology, human in the loop, orchestration, those also are going to play a critical role. So, Kevin, what other example do you have? Because I do want to get to you showing the Maestro products, so our audience can actually visualize it. But give us another example of a customer that you're working on that illustrates what we're talking about here with regards to end-to-end processes and be able to orchestrate those across the landscape.
Well, yeah, I'll go a little bit into an example I'm seeing kind of across the healthcare field, right? So, you know, I've been working with a lot of healthcare companies lately where there's a common theme around claims processing. There's a common theme around, helping both the payer and the provider go through and agentify their business. And you know, it almost feels like a little bit of like an arms race that's going on right now, where both sides of the equation, whether you're an insurance company that's looking to kind of automate the claims and help kind of move things faster from that perspective, or you're a provider that's helping trying to get your patients the care that they need faster and stronger. You know, essentially we're going through and agentifying kind of both areas of the business. And you know, with that, you know, we've been helping a number of different customers out with, being able to go through and essentially apply their very complicated workflows for these kind of medical-based processes, you know, across the board. And so whether that's going through and, from a provider's perspective, being able to go through and medically summarize all of the various different patient notes that a physician might have captured, and then use that as part of the prior authorization request for a procedure that that patient needs. And then from the payer's perspective, being able to go through and kind of digest and evaluate that against the clinical guidelines that that particular, payer has in place, to rather figure out is, hey, this is something that we're going to need to ask the provider for more information on, or is it something that we can go through and kind of do a straight through claims processing kind of scenario. And what we're seeing is both sides are really working hard at going through and deterministically figuring out, hey, what is possible to go through and kind of have from a checks and balances perspective. You know, what information can I go off to my EMR system and go through and say, hey, given that I have XYZ flags set, I know it's going to go through, these flows. Or if it's going to go through and, be able to need to look at the medical notes, maybe throwing that off to an agent to be able to go off and kind of look at it and say, how do we take this forward? And so it's really kind of an arms race, more or less, that's kind of starting up. And, it's a really exciting time because, from my position in 10,000-foot view, I'm being able to see kind of both sides of the equation and really where both sides are really trying to figure out how do they provide better care to the patients. Yeah. And so
Those customers mentioned about the concern around auditability and the monitoring ability around those use cases.
Yeah, we a lot of customers, especially in kind of the healthcare, rightfully so, have a lot of concerns around that, especially like sharing PII or personally identifiable information, and that's where I think UiPath kind of has a unique solution and solve for that, where we have the ability to go through and kind of block out personal identifiable information before it ever touches out to an LLM. And so we essentially kind of scrub it for personal information, put placeholders in its place, and then if there is any once the agent goes through and responds to that, we then slot back in those placeholder values. And what it means is that you're not shipping out your medically identifiable information out to these LLMs. Be it that we're also on kind of brokered connections that are also safe as well.
A great use case. In that payer provider landscape is obviously healthcare specific, but that type of thing exists in virtually every industry,
Mm-hmm.
right? Every industry has its own complicated, critical processes that have to be managed and done in the right way. And like what Masaki was just saying, in a way that's not only saving time, money, and compliance, but also is auditable, trackable, and secure. So maybe this is a good opportunity, Kevin, to pivot. And could you show us Maestro, show our audience what it actually looks like and how customers are leveraging this low code
Yeah,
platform?
absolutely. Let me go ahead and share my screen here and let's take a look. Ooh, okay, can you guys see?
Yep,
Yeah,
got
you
it.
can.
All right. So what I want to walk us all through today is an essentially a really good use case that showcases a lot of the different aspects of what we call Maestro, which is essentially the end-to-end workflow that we're looking at right now. And the scenario I want to paint for us all is, what we're going to walk through is a order management use case where this agentic process is essentially sitting on top of an email inbox, receiving customer communications inbound. And the way to think about Maestro is that there's always going to be some sort of business event that goes through and triggers this process, which in this case happens over here on the left-hand side for an email being received. And so we're going to look at it right now in simulation, but the idea is that this would be sitting out there in production on our database or on our orchestrator. And this would be listening for new emails that come in and then kick off this process for every single transaction or every single instance. And so the idea here is that we're going to end up receiving an email, which in this case is going to be from our friend Kathy, who is looking for an order update on order number 12345. And we can see that right here from kind of a simulated, this would be extracted from the email, but from development perspective, this is what's getting passed in. And so she's, looking for order number 12345. She hasn't received an update and is looking for, where things can go. And this order in particular is for a forklift from, UiLifts.com, which is a fictitious forklift company that, and Kathy's basically looking for a forklift that's going to help her with her lumber yard. And so I'll go ahead and save and debug this, which is going to go ahead and kick off this workflow. Now, when this email comes in, the first thing that we're going to need to do is actually understand what this email is about and how do we actually want to go through and process it. And so as the Maestro flow kind of kicks off here, we're going to see it graphically update. Here, as we go through and simulate this email being received, essentially what's going to happen is our Maestro process is going to kick off. Now, what we're looking at here is our development environment. This would all be kind of obfuscated away when these things are actually running in production, where each individual email getting received is going to go through this workflow that we're looking at now. And so first thing that happens is that we're going to take that email and pass it into our first agent. who's going to be responsible for kind of looking at this email and determining how we should go through and route that, which in this case, there was 3 possible options to route it as an inquiry, an update, or if there was just a general question. In this case, we ended up going down the inquiry path, and it called the next agent that was in sequence. Now, this agent is our Agentforce integration agent, which actually reaches out to Salesforce's Agentforce to basically have it return all the semantic details about this particular order. And so remember, we're looking at order number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we're making a call out to Agentforce for it to basically go through and tell us everything that it knows about order 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if we actually go and inspect and look at what the outcome from that was, we're able to go through and see in this response payload that there's quite a bit of information that we're able to use the agent that's sitting inside of Agentforce to do the best of breed things that Agentforce is capable of. And in this case, it ended up summarizing, the call transcripts that went through. It ended up providing a bunch of details around the order, what was purchased, various different information about how much was paid, and so forth. And that payload of semantic details gets passed into our next agent in sequence here, which is our UiPath order inquiry agent. And so what I want to do while that's running is actually go through and do a little bit of a deep dive into that agent where we can actually go through and see a little bit more on what's going on. Now, what I'm looking at now, we pulled up the agent that's this order inquiry agent. And this agent's main job is to go through and produce some sort of communication that updates the original email based on information that it went through and researched about this particular order. Now, in this case, we passed into it our email chain, as well as all of those order details that we got from our Agentforce agent. And we're going through and essentially having this agent reach out to SAP and go kind of take a look at the item master. We're giving it capabilities to go off and pull inventory. And, in this case, this agent went out to SAP and ended up finding that there's no inventory available. And so to kind of show what that looks like, this agent essentially opening up SAP, going out and using an RPA to automate inside of the system to go grab various different inventory levels. And then from that, it's going through and determining that, we don't have any inventory for the part that we're looking at and currently purchased. Now, from there, it calls a similar part finder agent, which uses that semantic details around why this product was originally purchased, as well as information around, our product catalog and all the various different types of forklifts we have available. And it tries to match new in-stock products that we would be able to go off and recommend to Kathy. And so after this agent runs, it drafts an email out to Kathy to respond to her original request and update her on the status. And we can see our Maestro flow ended up flowing back into this human in the loop kind of status here. And so in this point, we're essentially creating some sort of review process for somebody who's looking at this particular request. And so if I go jump into that request, which is in our UiPath Action Center, we're able to go through and see how the agent is currently processing, and as well as a brief kind of description of the email that was passed in, all the steps that the agent had taken, and then the actual response that we're planning to actually send out, which in this case, it looks like our agent's recommending this CMFL V00 model, which we have in stock. And we give here some reason why, where it's like, hey, it is able to help with those off-road conditions you mentioned and so forth. And so I'll go ahead and submit that as a response. And in a couple seconds here, we'll actually see it go reply to that email with that submitted response. And we're entering into kind of this event listener state. And this is where Maestro really, really stands out with the ability to have it go through and wait for some sort of event to take place before continuing on one way or the other, which in this case, I have 2 different events that it's waiting for. I could either time out here, after a certain amount of time, we don't want to, we can assume that Kathy's not going to reply to the original email. Or if she responds, we'll end up kind of taking that response and passing it all the way back through the chain here. And so in my email, I'll go ahead and open up the email that we received from our agent here. And I'll go ahead and mark this and just basically say, let's move forward with your suggestion. and we'll send that email across. And what will happen in about a minute, up to 5 minutes here, is that message will get received, and then it will continue back on through this flow. And essentially at this point, I'll jump to the video real quick here to kind of showcase kind of what's happens from this point onwards. Where the second that email gets responded to, it's going to go back into that triage agent, figure out how things are going to process. And in this case, we're expecting it to go down this update pathway here. And at that point, what happens is on a remote instance, we kick off a refund, we process a new order, all using an RPA. And just that quickly, we've gone through and did the refund and did the order replacement. And then we reach out to Agentforce and basically change it to the new order ID. And we basically ask Agentforce to update the order. And at this point, another email is drafted informing Kathy that, we've gone through and handled the refund request. And then, we can go through that same human loop validation step to check and review it. And so all in all, what we saw here was the ability for Agentforce to kind of manage an end-to-end customer interaction with deterministic steps along the way, which is really, the power of Maestro.
I love this demonstration so much for the few reasons. One, the customer user experience hasn't changed from the traditional way. They are still using the same method, which is email. So they don't need to change the way they interact with the organization. And also from the organization perspective, the only interface they're looking at was the action. All the automation is happening on the back end. So they have to just check the right information and the taken a right action, and everything else will be done by either agent automation or Maestro orchestration layer. And on top of it, it was so cool to see agent actually interacting with system that doesn't necessarily have API connection sometimes, because a lot of enterprise customer don't have an API exposed for certain systems, where RPA can be really handy, and they can be determine the deterministic workflow for the specific data inquiry. So agent won't do any actions that they are not supposed to do because everything is determined by RPA. So I love that the demonstration so much. What did you think, Bill?
Yeah, what stood out to me was back at Fusion, our customer conference in the fall of last year, two customers were talking on a video, and one of them said, as it was relating to agentic automation, he said UiPath is closer to the problem closer to the problem of kind of enterprise automation because of their RPA roots. And when you were showing that demo, it struck me that so much of that process was foundational, right? Deterministic, right? RPA, right? And most other platforms, if not all, they don't have the bedrock foundation in RPA that UiPath has. Now we're integrating agents and, of course, orchestration, which allows us to do that kind of beautiful end-to-end complicated process that you just showed to us.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Kevin, question: where do we go from here? What does the next 6 months look like for agentic automation for companies that are trying to figure it out? Well, what is your advice to them?
Yeah, and I guess my advice to all companies out there is to start kind of thinking about your processes, not as kind of these end-to-end workflows. I feel like we as RPA developers have a very myopic view at the way automation should be done, where we're very focused on the actual individual workflow and not the bigger end-to-end process that really we have the power to go through and automate against. And it really takes a new kind of way to think about automation, where not only are we able to go through and automate all of the individual workflows, but now that we have agents, we're able to stitch together those workflows into bigger and bigger processes. Oftentimes we were going through and building kind of just the small pocket of automation where it needed to go off to a human to go through and process from there, and then our automation stopped. What we have now is the ability to bring in agents, bring in human in the loop, which allows us to start kind of expand outwards that process to go really end to end across the board. And so I encourage everybody, take a look at Maestro, start to kind of think about how do you go through and diagram processes out, and really start to figure out like how can you tie various different workflows together in sequence and really start to bring a lot of power to being able to see bigger visions. And then within that, one of the things that we have coming over the next couple of weeks and months here is a new capability coming to Maestro, which is our ability to do case management as well. And so we should definitely talk about that at some future point, where essentially we're able to go through and tie a status or an entity across an entire interaction, and then give kind of business users a 10,000-foot canvas on how that process is performing across the board. Yeah.
I think you just teed up our next episode. What do you think about that, Masaki?
Let's do it. We have to invite Kevin again to the episode.
I'd be happy to come. Thank you guys for this.
Kevin, thank you for joining us. That was fantastic. We're definitely going to have you back on because we didn't do Maestro justice in all of its capabilities for customers. And I want to note that it's a live capability, it's a GA feature, right? Customers are using it today to build agentic workflows that leverage agents, robots, and people are getting real value out of it. So, Misaki, we definitely got to have Kevin back on. He just teased case management, so we probably need to make that our next episode. But until then, thank you all for joining. I hope you got value out of this. If you did, please like, comment, subscribe, and we'll see you again on the Agentic Advantage.